started off this presentation tonight with lots of your questions that Sarah sent me. I said, so what do everybody want? And she sent me a list of all of your questions. And what I've tried to do tonight is try to address as many of them as I can. There were rather a lot of questions, and I think we'd be here forever, wouldn't we, Sarah, if I tried to answer them all in the time that we've got. But what I thought I would do, first of all, was contact colleagues who've just been through Ofsted. So I thought that was going to answer a lot of your questions. So I've sort of done my slideshow in a minute that I'm going to share with you in the day of the life of what it was like. Now, one of them only happened 3 weeks before half term. So really quite quick, and another one happened in October. So they're both close. The one that happened just before the holidays, they actually went into DT as well. So I can tell you a little bit about that experience. Okay, so I'm going to share with you my slides now. Can you all see that?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Okay. So Deos, next to my name's the school I'm at, Dame Alice Owen School. Okay. So these were the questions that you all sent me. While I'm doing it, please don't hesitate just to stop me. And if you've got any more questions when I'm going through it. So we'll do questions, I think, as we're going through. But these were the questions that you sent me that I've tried to include in answering for you tonight. So I think, although we're talking tonight about the Ofsted deep dive, I do think everything that I'm going to show you tonight is really good for department development and to review your own curriculum provision. And I think the most important thing is there should be an idea of connecting and drawing together your curriculum, your teaching, your assessment and standards. That seems to be the way we're going to prepare for it really well. Another thing, and this is quite a tip really, is you've all got line managers or senior leaders that oversee in your departments. I think it's very important they have a clear intent of the D&T curriculum and have a solid implementation and impact understanding of it. I think it's quite easy for them not to really understand. And I think as leaders, it's our duty to make sure that these senior leaders are really educated about our curriculum, because it is very different to a standard subject or something. It's so vast and the big departments that we run. So I think that's very important to ensure that line managers have a solid understanding. So here is the dreaded call. So what I did was, these were 2 schools, and I said, okay, to the head teachers, to the deputies, to the heads of department, what happened from that dreaded call? And this is what they've said, and I've sort of got it over a 2-day period to give you a good idea. So they rang at midday the previous day, and they spoke to the head teachers for 90 minutes, which is quite a long conversation. And one school, they identified 6 departments to go and watch, and another school, they identified 7 departments. Now, I have heard that sometimes they don't identify any departments, and that Ofsted choose. But on these 2 schools, they did identify departments that they wanted to go and watch. One of the departments that they wanted to go and see was already raised on a previous Ofsted criteria. So that might be worth looking at your old Ofsted report, especially if you're new to the school, as to what departments were actually raised on it, because that there was no hesitation that they were going to go into that department no matter what. In the conversation with the heads, they talked about disadvantaged students and what their educational diet was. They talked a lot about the recovery curriculum, and they talked about the catch-up funding only briefly, but it was discussed. The head was asked to identify the strongest departments, asked to identify the ones that made most progress, not necessarily data-based, but holistically, or even departments that needed to make progress. They wanted to see the behaviour policy on the website. That's what they were looking at. And they asked about exclusion rates. And in one of the schools, it was identified as of high previously. So what can be prepared for for day one, after you get the phone call? So the 6 to 7 departments discussed to deep dive the following day. They said they wanted to see the heads of department for 45 minutes, and they wanted the lessons to be pre-identified. So it was very clear that the heads department would have a clear idea of what lessons were going to be seen. And they also wanted to speak to the department teachers, but as a group, not individually. They wanted to speak to the pupils in class, and they wanted to see their folders, their books, their booklets, whatever they were working on. They asked to speak to the safeguard lead of the school, and they wanted to have walks around at lunchtime and break times. And here, one of the schools says, we plan to have an SLT link in the HOD's meeting, and lesson observations, but Ofsted didn't want that, so it was not a requirement. So the paperwork to prepare for these inspections were that they wanted to see the school timetable and the times of the school day. They wanted the single central record for the school. They wanted to see a current staffing list, and on it they wanted indicating the early careers teachers. They also, the records were analysed for exclusions, pupils taken off roll, and incidents of poor behaviour. They also wanted to look at the records and analyse or look at the analysis of sexual harassment, sexual violence, bullying, discrimination, prejudice behaviour, racism, sexism, disability, homophobic, transphobic bullying, that type of thing. They wanted to see a list of referrals made to the DSL and those that were subsequently referred to the local authority. They wanted a list of pupils who have open cases with children's services and social care, and up-to-date attendance analysis for all groups of pupils. What else that's important for us? A summary of the school assessment, the school's current improvement plan or the equivalent to long-term provision, and any reports from external and that have been done on evaluation of the school. So sometimes I might be asked to go in and do a mock deep dive, that type of thing. They might want to see that. It might be that you're in a challenge partners group or something like that, and they would want to see that. So on day one, they're here. They arrived at school at 7:45. Interesting, both schools, they've arrived at 7:45. So, and they stood outside the main gate, and they watched the children coming in. They met with SLT for about 10 minutes and just introduced themselves. And then 3 inspectors were for the team, but only 2 of them were there for day 1. 2 inspectors left to watch students entering the school gate, and they watched an assembly. And that wasn't planned, that they just did it. And one of the things they kept saying, we're not here to judge departments. And that was loud and clear, apparently, because everybody, all the heads and people I've spoke to about it, they kept saying that, we're not here to judge. Okay. So I have now got a list of things that were asked heads of departments in languages and in English, I think, is the next one I can show you. And these were in the recent inspections. So one of the first questions they asked, well, it was the first question they asked the language department, do you follow the national curriculum? Tell me more about the curriculum journey throughout the school. Are languages compulsory? Why do you choose some not to do it? Why did they get the opportunity if they wish to? And do you have a curriculum map to show me? And that has been, the curriculum map to show me has been standard throughout that I've been chatting to people who've recently been Ofsteded with a new criteria. They've asked to see curriculum maps. So how does your vision and sequencing work through the classes and the key stage? This is very common, and a common word there is sequencing of words, which some of you have asked me about, and they really do want to see that sort of sequence journey of work through the key stages, but particularly at key stage 3 is what they've been looking at recently, and especially in DT. Do you have a deliberate approach to recalling knowledge? So how do you get recalling knowledge? How do you do retrieval learning? How is that planned into your lesson? And how does this practically work? So in terms of ambition and challenge, is your curriculum ambitious enough for students to excel? And again, that's a normal question that's being asked throughout. And what will we see when we go into your department lessons? So they're asking heads of department, okay, so what are we going to see? And I'll be asking students what they did and what they do in your lessons, and what are they learning next. So they're going to be speaking to the students within the lessons about what are they doing, what did they do last week, what are they doing next week. Okay, English department. So they did a national curriculum focus and a curriculum overview. They wanted to know about the reading culture within the school. What were the opportunities for reading? Are the books challenging? And if they are, or if they're not, how do you know? What intervention strategies there were, and what do you do for the bottom 20%? And do you remove students from lessons to do additional reading? How do you look at grammar and vocab taught, or how is it taught? And how is spoken language taught? So again, with the curriculum overview, straight away, why do you sequence the lessons or the learning in the way that you have? And do you have a curriculum map? And how do you know your curriculum is ambitious? And where do you provide challenge in the curriculum? And how do you provide cultural capital within English? And what will I see in the lessons? So those questions are just the norm at the moment. So this on day 1 is actually meeting the teachers in science and English departments, and they were met as a group, and they talked about, and this is an interesting one, work-life balance. What do we get here? Or what time do we get to school? What time do we leave school? I don't think I've ever been asked that ever in the 37 years I've been teaching, but that was quite an interesting question. And do we have to work in the evenings? And they wanted to know that. They wanted to know about our training, our teaching and learning styles, CPD, what was being offered to us in school. With support with special needs children, and what support do we get, and how do we get the information as teachers for them? Safeguarding, how do we make a referral, and have we had information about results of the Ofsted for safeguarding? Curriculum mapping, where are you on that, and where do you want to go with the curriculum mapping? And that was to individual teachers, not just heads department. This was interesting. They talked about reviewing into sexual harassment within the school. What was their review of it? And what was quite interesting, one school had actually done sexual harassment the Friday before the Friday before Ofsted. So they were just lucky, I think, that it was on the tip of everybody's tongue. With Equality First teaching individuals, and they were part of that group, and they made sure there was first teachers in there. How are teachers given training and the support to meet those targets? So those are sort of common things that are happening with teacher groups. So on day one, meeting the students, so the inspector was asked to see a handful of students from each class at the end of the day with their books, and he was asked about learning approaches and safeguarding to those students. So I shouldn't say he, because I don't know if it was a he or a she, but how are you helped to remember your knowledge, or even your previous knowledge from last year or the key stage? Do you know where you're going next on the curriculum, and do you feel safe in school? Then safeguarding, and this was with your designated DSL. This was a 60-minute meeting, and it was all about what's happening with reporting on safeguarding. And again, if not, why not? Focused on how staff can report safeguarding issues, and how do children disclose, and do they know this? And then there was a second meeting. Oh, no, actually it wasn't. This was another meeting with the other school. So there was DSL with +1, and that would be probably the deputy DSL, I imagine. And they were asked to go through some cases, and they had to submit in advance different types of cases, and then they picked which ones they was wanting to go through. So they really went into depth with safeguarding. They looked at peer-on-peer abuse, sexual harassment and sexual assault. They wanted to talk about training with staff, education to students, and do they have any cases? Staff wellbeing was part of the meeting as well. The deputy head teacher on both schools was spoken to, that were in charge of staffing, and they talked about development opportunities for staff, the well-being of staff, and how do they consider workload? What do they do? How do they manage it? They talked to people in charge of PSHE, careers, assistant head teachers, and deputies in charge of pastoral, as individuals and as a group in both instances. And they were very much focusing on how they prepare students for the next steps, 14 to 16 to 18 years. And they talked about the pastoral curriculum. They did a meeting with the SENCO, and they wanted to know how the curriculum was for those SEND students, and do these students have access to a breadth of curriculum? Do these children do they have ambitious curriculum given to them? Do they have a chance to be ambitious? And how is this done? Do they get more time, and do they get an alternative curriculum? There was 2 student groups on both schools. One was boys and one was girls. And why that was, I don't know, but that's how they did it in these schools. I know this isn't the norm, actually. But do you know what safeguarding is? They were asked. Do you know how to report issues? Do you feel safe? Can you self-refer? Are there any issues in your school? And have you done any work on peer abuse? They met the governors, and they wanted to meet the governors related to safeguarding. Do they know the school, and have they been trained particularly on safeguarding? And then finally, day 2, 2 heads of department and a deputy head were spoken to about curriculum assessment and data. What does curriculum mean to you? Have you looked forensically at the curriculum maps and then onto the units of learning, schemes of learning, schemes of work? Do the schemes of learning reflect the exact knowledge that we want students to know? And they asked about priorities going forward. They asked about how we design the curriculum with particular reference to sequencing backwards. And what are you most proud of? I thought that was a really nice question to be asked, even though it was on the final day. So the final comments that I've got from these recent inspections is they're very much focused on mid leaders. SLT, there was very little, and they were really bystanders. As far as SLT to prepare staff's concerned, and as heads of department, a little coaching goes a long way. So look at coaching your staff through the questions that I've shown you just, and I'm going to show you some more which are more subject specific. As you can see, everything was about safeguarding. So safeguarding, just keep it up. Both schools said they were very nice. So they were not grumpy, difficult inspectors. They were very, very nice. And they kept telling me that. We had to give them information. So don't assume they know. So get everything ready, like curriculum maps, get them ready. Make sure your line managers have those curriculum maps and they put them sort of under their noses. They did not ask for data, and they said you can get SLT watching much of it if you wanted to, but I don't think that really happened. So these are the things. Is everybody still here, by the way? I'm not hearing anything.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. We're all on mute, listening.
Yeah.
Very carefully to what you're saying, Amanda. Thank you.
I can't see you, and I'm like thinking, are they still there?
No, thank you. Because some of it, we've all had different roles and we've got different roles. So giving that little bit of background, I think, is helpful. So thank you.
Good. It's a pleasure. So now what I've done for the sort of next 10 minutes or so, I'll just tell you a little bit more about design technology as a whole. Okay. And these are sort of things vitally to consider, that they seem to be looking at Key Stage 3 currently. So one of the things you need to look at is, do you have a rotation in your subject areas? Do you rotate your teachers? Do you rotate your subjects? And how will or can you justify progress in that rotation? So when you do your curriculum maps, make sure it's very, very clear how you're showing progress. One of the schools, they went into DT. Of the one school, they went to 7 subjects. DT got good, it didn't get outstanding, and it was purely because the department had a rotation between different teachers and different subjects. And the heads of departments, I think there's head of food and head of product design, could not justify enough to show progress. And they got good, they didn't get outstanding. Now, if you looked at this department, we would all be in awe of this department. It's a brilliant department. The staff are really experienced. The facilities are excellent. The GCSE and the A-level results are well above national average. And what they do for children who can't access other curriculum areas, they do really well with value added. And for me, it was quite a surprise that this department didn't get outstanding. They got good, and it was purely because of our rotations. It was the school that got 7 departments looked at. They looked at science, they looked at DT, and they were the 2 that got good. And because they got good out of the 7 departments, the overall school got good. They didn't get outstanding. Now, for God knows how many years, 20 years of Ofsted, this school had always got outstanding, and they didn't get it. And one of the reasons was they couldn't show progress in DT. So be aware of that, and be aware that when you're doing your curriculum maps, try and look at how are we going to prove to Ofsted, or prove to ourselves, prove to our own progression, that we've got progress in there. And that journey that child is getting through our Key Stage 3 area, where are the gains? How do we regularly assess? How do we regularly moderate that assessment at Key Stage 3? We focus so much on Key Stage 4 because of our NEAs. That is something now really start to consider that at Key Stage 3. They also didn't like one particular school that started DT in Year 9. They felt that the curriculum was too short in Key Stage 3. So another thing to think about and consider and have conversations about if you start GCSE early. So these questions now are very much from what you sent me, and it's quite hard for me to answer them for individuals because we're all in a different school, we've got different types of students, different types of staff, and so on. But I've cross-examined through data and tried to look at key questions we need to answer as departments and as individual teachers to support that plan getting ready for a deep dive. So again, that question comes in about how do you ensure you've got an ambitious curriculum? Have you got provision for your disadvantaged or SEND students? What is that? And how do you support your most able students? What are you doing for them? And how do you know what to teach and when? So that's that curriculum plan, that curriculum map, and your schemes of learning. And why have you done it in that way? So why have you planned it in that way? And how do you ensure progression? So I keep talking about that, don't I? But it's just what's embedded throughout. And then that revisiting, so that recalling, retrieval learning, when, why, what aspects do you retrieve in that curriculum? Now, always we argue, don't we, in DT that there's no time. We have such little time, and that's really hard. But you can do those sorts of things in exit cards, quick plenaries, or doing short tests. I like doing quick online testing throughout my curriculum projects at Key Stage 3. And they're very, very quick. And sometimes they can be as quick as 5 minutes. We use all different platforms, but there's lots you can do very, very quickly. Another thing that as heads department we need to do is, what do you want students to know and understand that they can do by the end of Key Stage 3, and Key Stage 4, that helps with that progression. So at the end of Key Stage 4, what do you want? Then at the end of Key Stage 3, what do you want? And obviously, we get them from all different primary schools, and we really don't have a good foundation before they come to us. So thinking about that from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, that we need to take that into account as best we can when we're planning. So that sequencing comes up again, from one lesson to the next, from one unit to the next, and from year to the next. I think when we're planning staffing for this, one of the things we probably need to do is try to keep the continuity of teachers. So if we are moving in a rotation, how are we keeping every year the same teacher if we can? Now, bearing in mind, some teachers go part-time like I did, retired, or we've got staff moving on to other schools. That's very difficult. And D&T in London, we do have a lot of movement. So that's something to be starting to plan and think ahead, that we're trying to do that as much as possible. So how do you take account of previous key stages in planning the curriculum? I think I've already addressed that. How successful is the curriculum in DT? And what is your method for reviewing the curriculum? Are students aware of cross-curricular links with other subjects? Now, that's embedded in product design when it comes to maths. So thinking about that. Do you plan with other departments to ensure the same teaching methods are used? Now, if I look at that, I think the only thing that probably we do here is we definitely work together with art, food, textiles, computer science. We've done things like that together. And when we had the maths put into A-level and GCSE, we did have a meeting with maths teachers to help us. But is that enough? I'm not sure. Is it when we're doing teaching and learning ideas? Should we be doing similar things across? And as schools, some of you are doing the same pedagogy across, or in terms or half terms and so on. So do you plan with other departments to coordinate units? That might be something good to do with maths and science as well. Do you use and do you follow the national curriculum? And if you don't, what else do you have in place? And if so, how do you track full coverage of the national curriculum? But you've got to justify, if you don't do it, why? How have you tailored your curriculum for your learners? Do you promote specific careers, future learning in your lessons? Careers is something you should really try to embed within the subject area. And there's an awful lot of, again, stuff online to help you do that. How does the career curriculum provide opportunities to develop character traits such as resilience, independence and confidence? I think we can all have a giggle about that, about character traits when we've got them washing up in food and putting or dusting down and tidying up in DT. It's quite interesting, but I think we do develop character traits a lot. How is DT timetabled? Why is it appropriately suitable for your students in your school? Why is it timetabled like that? What opportunities are available outside of school? Are there technical or vocational courses? Which areas are you most pleased with and why? And which areas are you developing and why? Classic question, what will your department look like in 5 to 10 years' time? Have that in your heads. What quality subject-specific training, CPD, have you had in the last 3 years? That's quite interesting with COVID, hasn't it? But we were on a steep learning curve with teaching across our kitchen tables. That was interesting. I had a lot of children who lived abroad at that time. They all fled. So I had to change my timetable to teach children in Hong Kong, Singapore, you name it. So that was quite interesting. How do you keep up to date with subject developments and subject knowledge? what opportunities are there for wider discussion about DT within students, with students, and how is reading and encouraged to promote within our subject. One of the things I do, we have a little whiteboard on the doors, and we write each term what books we're reading as teachers, and we talk about them. And most of the time they're subject specific, but sometimes it might be like for the summer, you know, summer break, I'm coming back in September, I might put, you know, some of my lazy, you know, I don't know, lazy books, I call them, to make me relax. I might put those on the board, but we share what we're reading as well. But to encourage reading, to get them to read out loud in class is something we perhaps should do a little bit more often. And I don't see, when I've gone around schools, enough of that. How do you know pupils are making progress that are at least good within our subject? And how are you measuring this? How are you acting on your findings? And this isn't just head of department, this is everybody within the department. And tell me about your approach to assessment and how it shows that students know and remember more, and explain how you feel your qualifications should say Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 to make it relevant for your future destination. So where are your children going when they're leaving your school, and how do you make that relevant at those key stages? These are my top tips for teaching and learning within your curriculum. Number one, that retrieval learning, your sequencing of lessons, feedback, both verbal, written, oral feedback, assessment, your books, I've just put booklets there, but it's your folders, whatever you have, your diversing of the curriculum in DT across food, textiles. We've got a huge diverse curriculum. How do we implement literacy and reading, oracy? How do we plan questioning? How do we support our early careers teachers, wellbeing and more, and send students? So those were the things that I would say are my top tips.